March 15, 2024. Special Agent Margaret Hassan had been retired from the FBI for 3 years when the call came at 4:47 a.m. The voice on the other end was her former partner, Agent Rick Castellano. "Maggie, you need to turn on the news. Right now." She found the remote with shaking hands. Channel 5 showed federal agents in tactical gear surrounding a modest brick building. The headline crawled across the bottom: FBI and ICE raid private Somali school in Minneapolis. Al-Noor Academy. The same school she'd investigated 20 years ago when 3 children vanished without a trace. The same school where she'd been told the case was closed. No evidence, no leads. Move on. Maggie stared at the screen as agents led handcuffed teachers and staff toward waiting vehicles. In the crowd of onlookers, she spotted a face that made her blood freeze. A young woman, now grown, watching from across the street with eyes Maggie had never forgotten. Amina Osman, missing since 2004, presumed dead. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Sarah's hands trembled as she stared at the manila folder marked Classified, Operation Nightfall. Her signature was there, clear as day, on documents authorizing a wire transfer of $2.3 million to a shell company she'd never heard of. The date stamp read September 14, 2015, 3 days before she'd resigned from the DOJ in disgrace. The basement of Al-Noor Academy smelled of industrial cleaning supplies and old textbooks. Above her head, combat boots thundered across the gymnasium floor where just yesterday she'd watched 10-year-old Amina practice her spelling bee words. Now those same children were being herded into the parking lot while their parents sobbed in languages the agents didn't bother to understand. She photographed every page with shaking fingers: the wire transfers, the fabricated intelligence reports, her own memo, one she'd never written, recommending surveillance of high-risk Somali nationals in the Minneapolis corridor. Each document was a masterpiece of forgery, sophisticated enough to fool a federal judge, but sloppy enough that she could spot the inconsistencies. The letterhead font was wrong. Her signature slanted too far right. Most damning of all, the memo was dated for a day she'd been in the hospital getting her mother's cancer diagnosis. Someone had built an entire false narrative around her name, her reputation, her cases, and they'd waited 8 years to deploy it. Footsteps on the basement stairs. Sarah shoved the folder into her jacket and pressed herself behind the boiler. Agent Martinez appeared at the bottom of the steps. She recognized him from the Icefield office, a decent man who'd helped her with asylum cases back when the system still pretended to care about families. "Building's clear down here," he called up the stairs. His voice carried exhaustion, the kind that came from raiding schools at dawn and separating kids from their parents. When he turned toward her hiding spot, Sarah stepped out with her hands visible. Sarah Martinez lowered his weapon. "What the hell are you doing here?" "I could ask you the same question." She kept her voice steady despite the classified folder burning against her ribs. "This is a charter school, Miguel. These kids are American citizens." His face went hard. "We have intelligence indicating terrorist financing, document signatures from federal prosecutors." His eyes narrowed. "Your signatures, Sarah, from cases you worked in D.C. The trap was elegant in its simplicity. Use her own past to destroy the community she'd spent 8 years protecting. Frame her as either complicit or incompetent. Either way, her credibility would be shredded, and the families upstairs would disappear into detention centers scattered across 3 states. "Those documents," Sarah said carefully, "I've never seen them before." "That's what they all say." But Martinez hesitated. He'd known her for 5 years, had seen her fight for asylum seekers who had nothing to offer but their stories. "The brass says this goes all the way to Washington. Counterterrorism Task Force. Someone with your security clearance authorized financial support for known extremists." Sarah's blood went cold. Her security clearance had been revoked 8 years ago, the day she'd walked out of the DOJ rather than prosecute a case built on fabricated evidence. The same day she'd discovered that Operation Nightfall, the counter-terrorism investigation that had consumed 2 years of her life, was actually a CIA black site program that had tortured innocent refugees for intelligence they didn't possess. She'd kept quiet about Nightfall in exchange for the victims' families getting asylum, a devil's bargain that had cost her career, her marriage, and her faith in justice. But she'd thought the secret was buried with her resignation. "Miguel, listen to me." Sarah stepped closer, letting desperation creep into her voice. "Someone is using my old cases to target this community. The same people who buried Operation Nightfall 8 years ago." His radio crackled. "Martinez, we need you upstairs. Found something in the principal's office." "Stay here," Martinez ordered, but his conviction was wavering. "Don't make this worse for yourself." Alone again, Sarah pulled out her phone and scrolled through her contacts until she found David Kowalski, her former research partner from the DOJ, the only person who'd supported her decision to walk away from Nightfall. If anyone would believe her about the forged documents, it would be David. The call went straight to voicemail. Her second attempt triggered an automated message. "The number you have dialed is no longer in service." David Kowalski had been scrubbed from existence. Sarah's knees nearly buckled as the implications hit her. This wasn't just about destroying Al Noor Academy or deporting Somali families. Someone was systematically eliminating everyone who knew the truth about Operation Nightfall, and they'd saved her for last, using her to destroy the community she loved before they silenced her permanently. The folder of forged documents wasn't just evidence, it was bait. They wanted her to find it, to run, to look guilty. The real question was whether she'd walk into their trap or spring one of her own. The basement walls seemed to close in around her as Sarah pressed her back against the cold concrete. The folder felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds against her ribs, each forged document a countdown timer she couldn't see. Above, the thundering boots had moved toward the front of the building, leaving an eerie quiet broken only by the ancient boiler's wheeze. She thought of Amina's mother, Faduma, who cleaned offices downtown for 12 hours a day to afford the tutoring that would get her daughter into college. Of Hassan, the principal, whose own refugee journey had ended with a PhD in education and a dream of proving Somali children could excel when given the chance. Of the 43 families who'd trusted her legal advice, who'd signed papers and opened bank accounts and built lives based on her promise that they were safe here. The irony cut deep. She'd left federal prosecution to escape the moral compromises, only to become the weapon used against the very people she'd tried to protect. Her phone buzzed. A text from her assistant Lily at the clinic. 3 ICE vans just pulled up outside. "Should I lock the doors?" Sarah's throat tightened. The clinic occupied the ground floor of a converted Victorian house 6 blocks from here, its waiting room perpetually filled with scared families clutching manila envelopes full of hope and bureaucracy. She'd painted the walls soft green herself, hung children's artwork next to citizenship certificates, created a space that felt like sanctuary rather than government processing. "Lock everything," she typed back. "Tell everyone to go home. Cancel all appointments." What's happening? How could she explain that 8 years of careful distance from her past had just collapsed into rubble? That every asylum case she'd won, every family she'd kept together, every small victory against an increasingly hostile system was about to be weaponized against the community that had become her redemption? She climbed the basement stairs on unsteady legs, muscle memory guiding her through the building she'd helped design. They'd chosen the location deliberately. A former community center in the heart of the Somali neighborhood, walking distance from the mosque and the halal market and the social services office. She remembered the planning meetings in Faduma's living room, Hassan sketching classroom layouts on napkins while children played at their feet. The gymnasium was empty now except for scattered spelling bee flashcards and a forgotten backpack shaped like a dinosaur. Sarah picked up the cards, perseverance, resilience, determination, and slipped them into her pocket. Through the tall windows, she could see parents clustered in the parking lot, some crying, others making frantic phone calls. Their children stood close, eyes wide with the particular confusion that came from watching adults fail to explain the inexplicable. She spotted Miguel Martinez near the school's main entrance, his shoulders tense as he spoke into his radio. Beyond him, Agent Carson from the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Unit was directing the evidence collection with the kind of methodical precision that turned lives into case numbers. Sarah recognized the choreography from her prosecutor days, the careful documentation, the chain of custody protocols, the performance of legitimacy that would make the fabricated evidence legally admissible. Her reflection caught in the glass doors, 54 years old, graying hair pulled back in the same practical bun she'd worn to court appearances, lines around her eyes that spoke of too many late nights reviewing deportation cases. She looked like exactly what she was, a lawyer who'd traded power for principle and was still paying the price. The morning sun slanted through the windows, illuminating dust motes that danced like tiny accusers in the air. 8 years ago, she'd watched similar light filter through her DOJ office windows as she'd written her resignation letter. The words had felt like a small death. Then, I can no longer in good conscience participate in prosecutions based on intelligence I believe to be fabricated. She'd never sent the letter. Instead, she'd walked into Deputy Director Harrison's office and negotiated the devil's bargain that had haunted every day since. Her silence about Operation Nightfall's torture program in exchange for asylum approval for the families whose confessions had been extracted through waterboarding and sensory deprivation. 47 families had gotten their papers. 47 families had started new lives while she'd retreated to Minneapolis to build something clean and small and honest. She'd told herself it was penance, but really it was hiding, and now her hiding place was burning down around her. The folder pressed against her ribs with each breath, a reminder that someone had planned this moment for years. Someone who knew about her mother's cancer diagnosis, about her signature patterns, about the exact documents that would make her look complicit while giving her just enough evidence to realize she was being framed. They wanted her to run, to look guilty, to abandon the families in the parking lot and disappear into whatever safe-house instinct might provide. Instead, Sarah walked toward the front doors, toward Miguel Martinez, and the choice that would define whether the last 8 years had meant anything at all. Sarah pushed through the glass doors, the morning air hitting her face like a slap of reality. Miguel Martinez looked up from his radio, his expression shifting from official authority to something closer to concern when he saw her approach. "Sarah, you need to leave. Now." His voice carried an urgency that hadn't been there in the basement. "This is about to get much worse." Before she could respond, a black sedan pulled into the parking lot with government-issue precision. Sarah's blood turned to ice water as she recognized the man stepping out of the passenger seat, Deputy Director James Harrison, looking exactly as he had 8 years ago when she'd walked into his office to negotiate her silence. Silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of predatory smile that had made her skin crawl even when they were supposedly on the same side. "Christ," Miguel muttered under his breath. "What's DOJ doing here?" Sarah knew exactly what DOJ was doing here. Harrison had come to watch her world burn, to ensure his loose end was finally tied off permanently. The man who'd orchestrated Operation Nightfall's cover-up was here to witness her destruction. Harrison's eyes found hers across the parking lot, and his smile widened. He said something to the agent beside him, a woman Sarah didn't recognize, mid-30s with the sharp edges of someone hungry for advancement. They began walking toward the school entrance, Harrison's gait unhurried, confident. A predator who knew his prey was cornered. "Sarah Chen." Harrison's voice carried across the distance between them, loud enough for the gathered parents to hear. "I was hoping we'd have a chance to talk." The families in the parking lot fell silent, their conversations dying as they sensed the shift in atmospheric pressure that came with real power arriving. Faduma clutched her 10-year-old daughter closer, her eyes darting between Sarah and the federal agents like she was watching a tennis match that would determine her family's fate. "It's been what, 8 years?" Harrison stopped just close enough to invade her personal space. "You look well. Quiet life suits you." "Director Harrison." Sarah kept her voice level despite the folder burning against her ribs. "This is a surprise, is it?" His eyebrows rose with mock innocence. "When one of my former prosecutors is linked to terrorist financing, I like to handle things personally. Professional courtesy." The words hung in the air like a challenge. Around them, ICE agents continued their methodical documentation while parents wept and children asked questions no one could answer. but Sarah felt the weight of Harrison's attention like a physical force, the same way she'd felt it 8 years ago when he'd explained why Operation Nightfall's torture victims would never see justice. "I'm sure there's been some mistake," she said carefully. "Any documents bearing my signature from that period would have been part of my caseload review before resignation." Resignation. Harrison savored the word. Such a clean way to describe walking away from your duty to national security. Miguel Martinez shifted uncomfortably beside them, his radio crackling with updates from agents still searching the building. Sarah could see him putting together pieces he didn't want to understand, the tension between her and Harrison, the way this felt less like a terrorism investigation and more like a personal settling of accounts. "Agent Martinez," Harrison said without looking away from Sarah, "I'll need to review all evidence collected here before it goes to the field office. Chain of custody is crucial in cases involving former federal prosecutors." The emphasis on former felt like a blade sliding between ribs. Sarah understood the message. Whatever evidence existed, Harrison would control the narrative, just like he'd controlled the narrative around Operation Nightfall, turning tortured refugees into willing informants and government misconduct into national security necessity. "There's something you should know," Sarah said quietly, "about the documents you found. The signatures are yours," Harrison interrupted smoothly. "We've had handwriting experts confirm it. Very thorough documentation from your time on the Nightfall Task Force. Amazing what surfaces when national security is at stake." The words hit like physical blows. He wasn't just referencing Operation Nightfall. He was threatening to expose it, to reveal that she'd known about the torture program and stayed silent. Her devil's bargain would become evidence of complicity, her protection of 47 families twisted into proof of corruption. Sarah felt the ground shifting beneath her feet as the full scope of the trap became clear. Harrison hadn't just forged documents linking her to terrorist financing. He'd weaponized her own moral compromise, turning her silence about Operation Nightfall into the motive for her supposed crimes. Anyone investigating would find a former prosecutor who'd walked away from the war on terror under suspicious circumstances, then spent 8 years building relationships in the exact community now under investigation. The narrative was elegant and devastating. Sarah Chen, former DOJ prosecutor, had been turned by the very people she'd been tasked to investigate. Her work at the immigration clinic wasn't penance, it was recruitment. "The truth has a way of coming out," Harrison continued, his voice carrying the satisfied tone of a man who'd spent years planning this moment. "Don't you think?" Sarah looked at the families in the parking lot, at Hassan being led away in handcuffs, at Amina clinging to her mother's hijab. 8 years of careful rebuilding, of small victories and quiet redemption crumbling into dust. But beneath the fear, something else stirred. The same rage that had driven her to write that resignation letter. The fury at a system that destroyed innocence to protect its own sins. Harrison was right about one thing. The truth did have a way of coming out. The question was whose truth would survive. Sarah's hands trembled as she walked away from Harrison, each step feeling like she was crossing a minefield. The parking lot stretched before her like an obstacle course of broken lives. Faduma still clutching Amina, elderly Mr. Ahmed leaning heavily on his cane, while his grandson translated the chaos into Somali. Teenagers who'd been preparing for homecoming dance, now watching their principal loaded into a federal van. She needed to think, to find somewhere quiet where she could process what Harrison had just threatened and figure out her next move. But as she reached the edge of the school property, Miguel Martinez fell into step beside her. "Don't," he said quietly. "Don't what?" "Whatever you're planning. Running, hiding, calling some lawyer friend from your DOJ days." He glanced back toward Harrison, who was now speaking with Agent Carson near the evidence van. "You need to understand something, Sarah. I've been working these cases for 12 years. I've never seen the deputy director personally oversee a school raid." Sarah kept walking, her mind racing. The folder pressed against her ribs felt heavier with each step, its contents simultaneously her salvation and her damnation. Maybe he's just thorough. Bullshit. Miguel's voice carried an edge she'd never heard before. "You want to know what's really happening? 3 hours ago, I got a call telling me this raid was being elevated to a joint terrorism task force operation. When I asked why, my supervisor told me to stop asking questions. When I pushed harder, he told me my performance review was coming up. They reached Sarah's car, a dented Honda Civic that looked absurdly normal next to the government vehicles swarming the area. She fumbled for her keys, buying time to process what Miguel was really saying. "You think they threatened you. I think they're cleaning house." He lowered his voice further. "And I think you know why." Sarah's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. "Your clinic. 5 minutes. Come alone or the families pay." Her blood turned to ice. Through the Civic's rear window, she could see Harrison watching them, that predatory smile still playing at the corners of his mouth. He'd anticipated this moment, planned for her to seek help from the one federal agent who'd shown her any compassion over the years. "Miguel, you need to walk away from me, right now." "What?" "Sarah. I'm serious. Whatever this is, whoever Harrison really works for, you don't want to be seen helping me." She unlocked her car with shaking fingers. "Think about your family, your pension, your performance review." Miguel's face went pale as the implications hit him. "Jesus Christ. What did you do 8 years ago?" The question hung between them like an accusation. Sarah thought about the resignation letter she'd never sent, about Harrison's office where she'd traded justice for expedience, about 47 families who'd built new lives on the foundation of her silence. She told herself it was the right choice. Save who you can, live with the compromise. But compromises had a way of coming back to collect interest. "I tried to do the right thing," she said finally, "and I failed." She was about to get into the car when her phone rang. The caller ID made her stomach drop. David Kowalski. The man whose number had been disconnected an hour ago was somehow calling her. "Sarah?" David's voice sounded strained, hollow. "Thank God you answered. David, where are you? I tried calling." "Listen to me very carefully. Don't go to your clinic. They're waiting for you there. Harrison's people, not FBI." His words came in a rush, punctuated by what sounded like traffic in the background. "I've been running since yesterday. They killed Janet Morrison, their former colleague from the Nightfall Task Force, the one who'd compiled the evidence of torture that Harrison had buried." Sarah's legs nearly gave out. "David, what's happening?" "The same thing that happened to Tom Brennan last month, and Lisa Rodriguez in March. Remember them from our team?" His voice cracked. "They're calling them suicides, accidents, but we both know what they really are." Sarah gripped the phone tighter. Tom and Lisa, she'd seen their obituaries, had even considered attending the funerals before convincing herself it was safer to stay away from anything connected to her past life. "How many of us are left?" "Just you and me. And Sarah?" The line crackled with interference. "The documents they planted at your school. I think they're real. Not the signatures, but the financial transactions. Someone's been using Operation Nightfall accounts for years, moving money through legitimate channels. Channels you helped establish." The folder against her ribs suddenly felt radioactive. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying Harrison's not just covering up the past. He's still using it. And you're the only one left who can prove it." The line went dead. Sarah stared at her phone, Miguel watching her with growing alarm. Around them, the organized chaos of the federal investigation continued. Agents loading evidence, parents making desperate phone calls, children who didn't understand why their safe place had become a war zone. Harrison was still watching from across the parking lot, his patience predatory and absolute. He knew she had nowhere to run, but he'd made one mistake. He'd assumed she wanted to survive. Sarah sat in her car for 30 seconds, engine off, watching Harrison orchestrate the systematic destruction of everything she'd built. The weight of David's words settled into her bones like radioactive poison. "Just you and me. 5 people dead. 5 former colleagues who'd witnessed Operation Nightfall's horrors reduced to obituaries and closed caskets." She pulled the folder from her jacket, spreading the documents across her passenger seat with the clinical detachment she'd learned as a prosecutor. Bank routing numbers, wire transfer authorizations, account signatures, all bearing her forged name, all dated to periods when she'd been legitimately processing asylum cases. But David was right. Strip away her signatures, and the financial architecture was real. Someone had been moving money through immigration services accounts for years, using the bureaucratic machinery she'd helped construct to launder funds for operations that officially didn't exist. Her phone buzzed again. Another text, clinic, now, or Hassan's family gets deported tonight. The threat crystallized something in Sarah's chest, transforming her paralysis into cold fury. Harrison had made this personal by targeting the school, but threatening Hassan's 12-year-old daughter crossed a line that made survival irrelevant. She'd spent 8 years learning to live with compromise. She wouldn't spend another day learning to live with cowardice. Sarah started the engine and drove toward her clinic, each mile feeling like a descent into the mouth of something terrible. Minneapolis looked different through the windshield of a woman with nothing left to lose, sharper, more honest. The immigration clinic sat on University Avenue between a Somali restaurant and a used bookstore, its modest sign promising legal services, Adiga Sharsi in English and Arabic. She'd chosen the location for its anonymity, never imagining it would become the final scene of a drama 8 years in the making. 2 black SUVs were parked outside, not FBI vehicles. These had the sterile anonymity of private contractors. The men standing beside them wore suits that bulged in all the wrong places, their postures screaming military training adapted to civilian wet work. Harrison wasn't taking chances. Sarah parked across the street and sat for a moment, studying the building where she'd helped 300 families navigate the labyrinth of American immigration law. The walls held photos of citizenship ceremonies, thank you letters in 6 languages, children's drawings of American flags colored outside the lines, small victories that had felt enormous at the time. Her phone rang. Harrison's voice was warm honey laced with arsenic. "Sarah, you're late. We were beginning to worry. I'm here." "Excellent. Come up to your office. We have so much to discuss." The line went dead. Sarah checked her phone one more time. No missed calls from David. No miraculous reprieve from some unexpected ally. She was alone with the weight of what she'd learned and the certainty that Harrison's patience had finally run out. She walked toward the clinic entrance, past the contractors who didn't bother pretending not to watch her every step. The lobby smelled like the jasmine tea her assistant Miriam brewed each morning, a small comfort that made Sarah's throat tighten with unexpected grief. She was saying goodbye to this life, whether she wanted to or not. Harrison waited in her office, settled behind her desk like he belonged there. He'd made himself coffee from her personal machine, a small violation that felt more intimate than threats. The man beside him was younger, harder, the kind of operative who'd graduated from Guantanamo to black sites to domestic cleanup work without questioning orders. "You look terrible," Harrison observed. The weight of conscience, perhaps? Whose money was it? Sarah remained standing, her hand resting on the doorknob. "The accounts you've been using, where did it come from? Does it matter? Drug cartels, arms dealers, human traffickers. The global economy is wonderfully fluid when you understand the underlying mechanisms." Harrison sipped his coffee with appreciation. "Your asylum approvals created such useful documentation. Families with legitimate immigration status make excellent money mules when properly motivated." The casual admission hit Sarah like a physical blow. The 47 families she'd saved, the compromise she'd made to protect them from Harrison's torture program, had become unwilling participants in whatever criminal enterprise Operation Nightfall had evolved into. Her moral victory had been twisted into another layer of victimization. "You've been blackmailing refugees for 8 years. I've been funding necessary operations that Congress lacks the stomach to authorize. Your people have been living the American dream, contributing to American security. Everyone wins. Except the ones you've killed." Harrison's smile faded. Tom, Lisa, Janet, they developed unrealistic expectations about truth and consequences. "You're smarter than that, Sarah. You understand that some secrets are too dangerous for democracy to survive." The operative beside Harrison shifted slightly, his hand moving toward his jacket. Sarah recognized the body language from her prosecutor days, the subtle preparation that preceded violence. They'd brought her here to die, but first they wanted her to understand why her death was necessary. Her grip tightened on the doorknob. David's voice echoed in her memory. "You're the only one left who can prove it." "Not anymore." Sarah's mind raced through 8 years of carefully buried memories, and suddenly the pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. The families Harrison claimed to be using as money mules, she'd seen the evidence herself, not in some classified briefing, but in her own case files. "Miguel showed you the financial records from the school, didn't he?" she said slowly. "But those weren't the only documents you planted." Harrison's coffee cup paused halfway to his lips. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting." "The wire transfers, the routing numbers." Sarah's voice grew stronger as the revelation crystallized. "You didn't just forge my signature on new documents. You've been backdating transactions into my old case files for years, making it look like I've been running this operation since I left DOJ." The operative's hand stilled at his jacket. Even Harrison's predatory smile flickered. "Every family I helped, every asylum approval, every green card application. You've been building a paper trail that makes me look like the architect of your money laundering scheme." Sarah felt a bitter laugh escape her throat. "That's why you needed the school raid to go public. You're not just silencing me, you're framing me for everything." "Sarah." David was wrong. The words came faster now, 8 years of self-doubt crystallizing into terrible certainty. "I'm not the only one left who can prove what happened with Operation Nightfall. I'm the only one left who can be blamed for what's happened since." Harrison set down his coffee with deliberate precision. "You're overthinking this." "Am I?" "Because I just realized something else." Sarah's grip on the doorknob was the only thing keeping her upright. "You didn't kill Tom, Lisa, and Janet because they knew about the torture program. You killed them because they knew you've been stealing from it. Operation Nightfall didn't end 8 years ago. It went private." The silence stretched between them like a held breath. Harrison's mask of genial menace finally slipped, revealing something far colder underneath. "The American people have no stomach for the dirty work that keeps them safe," he said quietly. "Congressional oversight committees clutch their pearls at enhanced interrogation but demand intelligence that can only be obtained through methods they refuse to authorize. Someone has to bridge that gap, Sarah. Someone has to do what's necessary. By becoming a war criminal for profit. By remaining a patriot when the system lacks the courage to support true patriots." Harrison stood, his movement fluid and threatening. "Your resignation 8 years ago forced us to privatize certain operations. That privatization required funding streams that Congress couldn't trace. Your immigration clinic provided perfect infrastructure for those streams." Sarah's stomach dropped as another piece fell into place. "The families you've been blackmailing, they think they're sending money to relatives overseas, don't they? Emergency funds, medical bills, school fees. Small amounts that don't trigger reporting requirements. Brilliant in its simplicity, and completely traceable to the lawyer who established their legal status." Harrison's smile returned, sharper now. "Every transaction bears your fingerprints, metaphorically speaking. Years of gradual escalation that paints a picture of a corrupt prosecutor who resigned before she could be caught." The revelation hit her like a physical blow. Every family she'd helped had become an unwitting participant in Harrison's scheme, their gratitude weaponized into compliance. The money they thought they were sending to help relatives was funding black operations that made Operation Nightfall look restrained. "How much?" she whispered. 47 families, averaging $2,000 per month for 8 years. Harrison's voice carried the satisfaction of a man revealing his masterpiece. Just over $9 million in untraceable funding. Enough to maintain a small army of contractors and informants without troubling Congress for appropriations. Sarah thought about Faduma's family, about Hassan's daughter, about all the parents who'd trusted her with their children's futures. They'd been sending money they could barely afford, believing they were helping family members who, she realized with growing horror, probably didn't exist. The relatives overseas, they're fictional. Enhanced backgrounds, fictional injuries, fictional schools, fictional medical bills. Your people have been remarkably generous in supporting fictional families while funding very real operations." Harrison stepped around the desk, closing the distance between them. "And when this all comes to light, Sarah Chen will be remembered as the mastermind who exploited immigrant trust for personal profit. But as Harrison spoke, something in his tone, the casual cruelty, the assumption of total victory, triggered a memory that changed everything. 8 years ago, in his office, he'd used almost identical words. You understand that some secrets are too dangerous for democracy to survive. The same arrogant certainty that he could define patriotism for everyone else. You're wrong about one thing, Sarah said quietly. Oh? You said everyone wins, but you forgot about yourself. She met his eyes directly. You're not funding operations Congress won't authorize. You're funding operations that benefit William Harrison, because patriots don't steal from the people they're supposed to protect. Harrison's face went cold as winter stone. The temperature in the room seemed to drop 10 degrees. Harrison's mask of civilized menace finally cracked, revealing something far more dangerous underneath. A man who'd convinced himself that his crimes were virtues, now confronted with the possibility that he might be wrong. Careful, Sarah. His voice carried the quiet menace of a man accustomed to being obeyed. You're approaching the kind of moral absolutism that got your former colleagues killed. But Sarah felt something shifting inside her chest, a resolve crystallizing like steel under pressure. For 8 years, she'd carried the weight of compromise, telling herself that saving 47 families justified enabling Harrison's program. Now she understood that her silence hadn't saved anyone. It made them targets. David's still alive, she said, taking a step back toward the door. And he's got copies of everything. The operative's hand moved inside his jacket, but Harrison raised a finger, stopping him. David Kowalski is a paranoid alcoholic whose credibility died with his security clearance. Harrison moved around the desk with predatory grace. Even if he surfaces with wild conspiracy theories, who's going to believe him? A disgraced DOJ washout with PTSD and a drinking problem? The financial records are real. The bank routing numbers, the wire transfers. All traceable to you. Harrison's smile returned, colder now. We've been very thorough, Sarah. Your electronic signature on authorization forms, your legal letterhead, your personal access codes used for account verification. 8 years of evidence that you've been running a sophisticated money laundering operation disguised as humanitarian aid. Sarah felt the walls closing in, but something else was happening. A clarity she hadn't felt since the day she'd walked out of DOJ. Harrison's confidence was absolute, but it was built on a foundation he didn't fully understand. He saw her as a broken prosecutor carrying guilt, not a woman who'd spent 8 years learning how the system really worked from the ground up. You made one mistake, she said quietly. I doubt that. You assumed I'd been sitting on my hands all these years. Sarah pulled out her phone, her fingers steady despite the adrenaline coursing through her veins. But I've been documenting everything. Every family you've blackmailed, every fictional emergency, every fake relative bleeding them dry for money they couldn't afford. Harrison's expression flickered. You have no idea what you're dealing with. I know exactly what I'm dealing with. You're not some patriotic shadow warrior protecting democracy. You're a mid-level bureaucrat who found a way to steal millions from refugees while telling himself he's saving America. Sarah's voice grew stronger. And I know something else. The reason you needed to frame me isn't just to cover your tracks. It's because the money's running out, isn't it? The silence stretched between them like a taut wire. Harrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, the first crack in his armor of absolute control. Refugee families can only send so much before they break financially, Sarah continued. And with immigration enforcement ramping up, your victim pool is shrinking. You need a scapegoat to explain where $9 million went before your own superiors start asking questions. The operative stepped forward, but Sarah was already moving, her hand on the doorknob. The beautiful thing about documentation, she said, is that it creates patterns. And the pattern you've created doesn't show a corrupt prosecutor. It shows a systematic exploitation scheme that requires ongoing government access to maintain. She met Harrison's eyes directly. Access you still have. Access that would disappear if anyone looked too closely at your current position. Harrison's face had gone pale beneath his practiced composure. For the first time since she'd known him, he looked genuinely rattled. You think you've been clever, but you've been sloppy. Sarah pressed on. Because you never expected the refugee community to organize, to compare notes, to realize their families overseas were all having the same convenient emergencies. Her phone buzzed, a text she'd been expecting. Turns out 47 families talking to each other creates a pretty compelling witness list. Sarah, you're making a serious mistake. The only mistake I made was believing you 8 years ago when you said some secrets were too dangerous for democracy. She opened the door, keeping her eyes locked on Harrison's increasingly desperate expression. Democracy can handle the truth about torture programs and cover-ups. What it can't handle is people like you who think they get to decide what democracy can survive. The sound of sirens began building in the distance. Not the organized presence of a federal raid, but something else. Something Sarah had been planning since she'd realized Harrison's frame was too perfect, too complete. The families are done being silent, she said quietly. And so am I. Harrison lunged forward, but Sarah was already through the door, the weight of 8 years' worth of carefully buried truth finally lifting from her shoulders. Sarah stepped into the clinic's hallway as Harrison's footsteps pounded behind her. His composure finally shattered. The sound of sirens grew louder, not federal vehicles, but Minneapolis police responding to 47 simultaneous reports of financial fraud. The families she'd helped had found their voices at last. You have no idea what you've started, Harrison snarled, catching up to her at the top of the stairs. His face was flushed, the careful mask of bureaucratic civility completely gone. Those operations save American lives. Whose lives? Sarah turned to face him, no longer afraid. The contractors you pay to intimidate refugees? The informants you plant in mosques? Or just your own? The operative appeared beside Harrison, weapon drawn but uncertain. Too many variables, too public now with sirens echoing off the building walls. Through the window, Sarah could see news vans pulling up behind the police cars. The families hadn't just filed reports, they'd called every media outlet in the Twin Cities. 8 years ago, you told me some secrets were too dangerous for democracy, Sarah said, her voice carrying down the stairwell. But you never believed that. You just knew the truth would destroy you. Harrison's laugh was bitter, desperate. The truth? You want to talk about truth? Your precious refugees. Half of them lied on their asylum applications. Family members who weren't really dead, persecution that was exaggerated, stories crafted for maximum sympathy. You helped them lie to get into this country, and you made them pay for that help, for the rest of their lives. Sarah felt something breaking open in her chest, not the guilt she'd carried for 8 years, but something cleaner. Rage. You turned their gratitude into a weapon. I turned their gratitude into funding for operations that keep this country safe. Harrison's voice cracked. Every dollar they sent prevented terrorist attacks, disrupted trafficking networks, saved innocent lives. Stop. Sarah's voice cut through his desperation like a blade. Just stop. I've seen your operational reports, Harrison. I know what your money really funded. Black sites that make Guantanamo look humane. Torture techniques that would make the Spanish Inquisition blush. Assassination programs that target American citizens. The operative shifted nervously as the sirens grew deafening. Police were in the building now, their voices echoing up from the lobby. Harrison's empire of shadows was collapsing in broad daylight. You think those families will thank you for this? Harrison's desperation was naked now. When ICE comes for them, when their asylum claims get reviewed, when they realize their savior just destroyed their only protection in this country? For a moment, Sarah felt the old doubt creeping back. The weight of unintended consequences, the price of moral absolutism. Then she thought of Faduma's daughter, drawing American flags with too many stars, of Hassan's son, practicing English by reading legal documents he couldn't understand, of 47 families who'd trusted her with their futures and been betrayed by her silence. They'll thank me for treating them like human beings instead of assets to be exploited. Sarah pulled out her phone, showing Harrison the screen. And they already are. The messages were flooding in. Families who'd been sending money to fictional relatives for years, finally understanding why their sacrifices never seemed to help. But instead of anger at Sarah, they were expressing gratitude for the truth. Relief that the endless emergencies were finally over. Determination to see justice done. Harrison stared at the phone as if it contained his own death warrant. In many ways, it did. Tom, Lisa, Janet. They didn't die because they threatened national security, Sarah said quietly. They died because they figured out what you really are. Not a patriot, not a guardian of democracy, just a thief with a security clearance. The police reached the second floor, their voices calling for everyone to remain calm. Harrison's operative holstered his weapon, recognizing the futility of violence in a building full of law enforcement and journalists. "You have no idea what you've unleashed," Harrison whispered. "The programs I funded, the operations I maintained, they'll find other funding sources, darker ones, less accountable ones." "Maybe." Sarah met his eyes without flinching. "But they'll do it without my silence, and without the cover of legitimacy you've been hiding behind." Harrison's shoulders sagged as the weight of exposure settled on him. 8 years of careful construction, unraveling in minutes. "You've destroyed everything." "No," Sarah said as the police reached their floor. "I've just stopped helping you destroy it yourself." The past 8 years crystallized into perfect clarity as Harrison raised his hands in surrender. The guilt, the compromise, the quiet desperation of trying to save 47 families while enabling the system that victimized them, all of it had led to this moment. Truth confronting power. Democracy choosing courage over comfort. As the handcuffs clicked around Harrison's wrists, Sarah finally understood what David had been trying to tell her all along. Sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is refuse to let patriotism be used as an excuse for evil. 3 months later, Sarah stood in the same courthouse where her federal career had ended 8 years ago, watching William Harrison accept a plea agreement that would put him away for the next 15 years. The man who'd once seemed untouchable now looked smaller somehow, diminished by the weight of exposed truth. His empire of shadows had crumbled with surprising speed once the light finally reached it. The families filled the gallery behind her. Faduma with her daughter, Hassan with his son, 45 others who'd found their voices after years of enforced silence. They weren't victims anymore, Sarah realized. They were witnesses, survivors. Americans who'd learned that democracy's promise was worth fighting for, even when democracy's guardians failed them. David appeared at her elbow, sober for 93 days now, and carrying a folder thick with documents. "DOJ wants to offer you your old job back," he said quietly. "Full reinstatement, back pay, the whole apology tour." Sarah almost laughed. 8 years ago, that offer would have meant everything to her. Now it felt like an artifact from someone else's life, a woman who'd believed that working within the system was the only way to change it. "What did you tell them?" "That you're busy." David's smile held echoes of the man he'd been before the drinking, before the paranoia, before they both learned that doing the right thing sometimes meant losing everything you thought mattered. "Your clinic's got a waiting list 6 months long. Apparently, helping people navigate the system from the outside is more effective than trying to fix it from within." Through the courthouse windows, Sarah could see the Al-Noor Academy across the street. The federal raid that had started everything felt like a lifetime ago, though it had been less than 4 months. The school was thriving now. Enrollment had doubled since the truth came out. Parents who'd been afraid to trust any institution were sending their children to a place where a middle-aged Chinese-American lawyer had proven that some people would risk everything to keep faith. "There's something else," David said, his voice careful. "The Senate Intelligence Committee wants you to testify about Operation Nightfall. Full immunity, closed session. They're finally ready to hear what we tried to tell them 8 years ago." Sarah considered this. The woman who'd walked out of DOJ would have jumped at the chance for vindication, for official acknowledgement that she'd been right all along. But that woman had been carrying the weight of other people's expectations, trying to save a career that had never really belonged to her anyway. Will it help the families? Probably not directly. But it might prevent the next Harrison from using patriotism as cover for theft. That decided it. Sarah had learned that justice wasn't about personal vindication. It was about making sure the system worked for everyone, not just those with security clearances and government connections. As they left the courthouse, Faduma approached with her daughter in tow. The little girl was 8 now, old enough to understand that the nice lawyer lady had helped keep her family safe, but too young to grasp the darker complexities of what that had required. "Miss Sarah," the child said in careful English. "I drew you something." She handed over a crayon drawing of two women standing in front of an American flag. "This one with exactly 50 stars," Sarah noted with a smile. The women were holding hands, one wearing a lawyer's suit, the other in a traditional hijab. At the bottom, in a child's careful script, "Thank you for helping my mama be brave." Sarah felt something break open in her chest, not the familiar weight of guilt or compromise, but something lighter, recognition. For 8 years, she'd carried the burden of believing she was broken, that her inability to work within the system made her a failure. But maybe the system had been broken all along. Maybe walking away hadn't been surrender but the first step toward finding another way to serve. "What are you thinking about?" David asked as they reached the street. Sarah looked back at the courthouse where Harrison was beginning his journey to federal prison, then forward to the clinic where 47 families had learned to trust again. The weight she'd carried since Tom's death, the guilt, the self-doubt, the quiet desperation of trying to save people while enabling their oppression, had finally lifted. "I'm thinking about something someone told me once," she said. "That sometimes the most patriotic thing you can do is refuse to let patriotism be used as an excuse for evil." David nodded, understanding. They'd both learned that democracy wasn't a building or a system or a set of laws. It was a promise that ordinary people could trust each other enough to tell the truth, even when the truth was dangerous, even when it cost everything. As they walked toward the clinic, Sarah felt something she hadn't experienced in 8 years: peace. Not the peace of forgetting, but the deeper peace of remembering why the fight mattered in the first place. Some wounds never fully healed, but they could teach you how to carry the weight of truth without letting it break you. The afternoon sun caught the windows of Al-Noor Academy, where children were learning that America could keep its promises, one family at a time.